All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of the Count Out Podcast. My name is Jason Shufeltowski, along with my co-host here, Justin Williams.
Hello.
Justin, how are you doing this evening?
Great. Yourself?
I'm doing great. We got a fairly busy show tonight. We got a lot to cover. We have the rest of our top 10 greatest wrestlers in the 90s to cover, and the week that was in professional wrestling. I just want to take a few seconds to throw a disclaimer out. I know we're going to get this question eventually. Why don't we discuss TNA wrestling? When TNA wrestling becomes relevant and they have something interesting, I'll cover it. I'm just not very interested in the product right now. I think there's more going on, honestly, in NXT and Ring of Honor and in Independence and TNA, so I just choose to not talk about TNA.
Yeah, and I won't really follow TNA. I mean, the ring has shrunk dramatically. They've come from they went to a 6-sided ring, then they went to like the standard WWE style ring, then they go down to a tiny one, and then, I don't know, the storytelling isn't that great at this point. It used to be good like back in 2004 and 5, but that's because they're just leeching off a bunch of indie people. But I don't watch it. I can't watch it.
So yeah, that goes ahead with our 20-second disclaimer on TNA wrestling. Let's go ahead and cover the things that were relevant this week. The main topic and the thing that's been lighting up the message boards and the wrestling world is the WWE has stripped Daniel Bryan of the World Heavyweight Championship. Now, there has been talk that his neck injury is worse than originally was feared. There's talk that rehab is not going so well, and there may be additional surgery needed. There's also talk that the injury, his recovery now that the way they're handling it, might be a work. He might not actually be hurt, and he may actually wrestle in Money in the Bank. There is some speculation that the stripping him of the title was just storyline, and he's actually going to participate in Money in the Bank. What do you think about that, Justin?
Well, they had his doctor on this week, the actual doctor that performed his surgery, to bring some relevancy, but I mean, they could have paid him off to do that. But
well, I can remember in other injury angles in wrestling too, where they have the exact doctor come out and say what actually happened, but some of it's kind of a work.
I mean, honestly, I don't think they would have done that to Daniel Bryan. I mean, it is a very symbolic screwing, I guess, like they have been doing for the past year. But I honestly don't see them taking the title from him at this point. He's too hot to do that.
No, I don't see it either. I mean, I think it's your conspiracy theorists out there. There's plenty of them in the internet wrestling community.
Oh, yeah.
Why would you waste building a character? You have the whole build-up where he gets defeated by somebody or he gets the authority put in front of him. Then he beats all those roadblocks. He wins the title at WrestleMania. Why would you take the title away from him just to have him come back, wrestle in the Money in the Bank, and then give him the title again? What does that accomplish?
Yeah, and I mean, why would you have him go out of WrestleMania as the champion? I mean, that was huge in itself. You don't really see that often anymore. So you build up to that point. I don't see it being fake. I honestly think it's because of all the headbutts he's been doing off the top rope and all that other stuff he's been taking over the years in Ring of Honor and all the other places. But
yeah, I agree. I can't see them, spending the time and resources into building him as a world champion. I mean, there's so many other outcomes that they could have done if they wanted to get the title off of him. I mean, there's Lesnar and whoever else he could have faced. I'm thinking that the injury is legitimate. I think he's actually seriously hurt, and I think it is going to be at least till SummerSlam, if not longer, before we see him come back to wrestle. Do you think then, when he comes back, that he's going to have to change his style of wrestling?
He's going to have to adjust. I'm going to predict that you're not going to see him doing, like I said, the headbutts anymore off the top rope. I don't think he's going to be doing a lot of the diving outside too much anymore.
Right.
Which I'm fine with. He doesn't have to do that. He's shown what he can do. I'm going to go back to kind of like Shawn Michaels when he had his back injury. He started to not do that for a very long time, all the dives and stuff. And then towards the end of the career, he was doing moonsaults off the top on the Taker, in WrestleMania 25. So I think it's going to be a while before we kind of see Daniel Bryan come back to true Daniel Bryan form. We might be looking at 4 or 5 years, but honestly, I think this may be a good career move for him, even though, I mean, he's going to be out, he's going to be kicked out, but look what that did for, like, Austin.
Right, when he got hurt against Owen Hart
exactly.
at SummerSlam and he won the IC belt. He actually went over Owen Hart right after that injury.
You're seeing that kind of happen, and that's kind of what brought on the Stone Cold era. Now, think of Daniel Bryan coming back and fighting the Authority, because they're not going away for an extremely long time.
That seems to be a long-term
It's a
storyline.
very, very long-term angle that they're working. So you could see Daniel Bryan being that Stone Cold character and screwing, the boss over, which they're trying to recapture.
Do you see Daniel Bryan, when he does return, do you see him get another world title run?
Yeah. It's going to eventually lead into another world title run. I don't really know how long, that's going to be. No one really does. And I mean, they're still even talking about having him in that ladder match at Money in the Bank, too, with his neck, if it clears. Which is just ludicrous in my opinion, but
well, if I see him as one of the more popular stars that they've had since the Cena era, why would you rush him back to get him hurt? That makes no sense from a business standpoint. Triple H basically seems like he's, for the most part, running the show, and everything goes through McMahon still, and he kind of finalizes it. Triple H isn't a dummy. He isn't gonna, I'm sure obviously there's pressure for Daniel Bryan to come back. You've got the guy, like I said, that you've built up. He's the star of your company now. He's the champ. You want him back. But, from a long-term business standpoint, I think Triple H is smart enough to say, hey, rest. We could do something here in the short term. Do your thing.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at people like CM Punk, though, like CM Punk would only go on, he'd get injured, like his legs and stuff, and he'd go out for like maybe 2-3 weeks and then come back.
Right.
Which may have been a bit short and may have eventually caused him to say, screw this, I'm done.
Yeah, that might, going into that too, that possibly might be one of the reasons CM Punk retired. His body was just beat to hell.
Yeah.
People can call it fake all they want, but your body when you're a professional wrestler. Like I said, I'm not a wrestler. Neither one of us are. I know nothing about it, but you just seeing the physical toll it takes on a body. You almost want to say it is more physical than football, more physical than hockey. If not, maybe the most physically exerting sport that there is today.
I mean, you have to have a lot of cardio, and you have to... I mean, you're taking drops all the time.
Right.
So, there's no... I could see it being a little bit more physical than football at times. I mean, it's not like, rugby level where it's just guys, mashing up against each other and like headbutting each other constantly.
Right.
But it is, I would say it is a fairly, very, very physical sport for what you're doing and what you're putting your body on the line for.
And I think the WWE has learned quite a bit. I mean, you had Edge, who had to retire for a similar kind of back spinal neck injury.
Yeah, exactly.
And, he had to retire on top, too.
Exactly.
So I think that they're not going to push this. They're going to let it heal on its own. And, if it takes 6 months, if it takes a year, then they've got 6 months worth of storylines written when he comes back. I mean, he'd come back, fight the Authority, win the title, whoever he's going to feud with. So there's no problem with a storyline there.
No, none at all. And I mean, look at another guy. Triple H himself was out for almost a year with that knee injury that he had.
On 2 different occasions.
Yeah. And he came back, and he won multiple championships off of both knee injuries, if I remember properly.
Correct.
So, it's going to happen. He's going to get another world title run. He's too over not to. So it's pretty much set in stone. I just really hope that the return feud is going to be with, the McMahon-Helmsley family. And I don't think Daniel Bryan needs to be in the title picture right away. There's a lot of young blood that's going to come up.
No, and I think it's something that they can build him up to. Like I said, they've got 6 months probably worth of storylines there. I mean, if he doesn't wrestle at SummerSlam, so be it. You've got Survivor Series, you have Royal Rumble. Yeah. You could have your Royal Rumble winner right there, have him fight back from that injury, fight the Authority, win the Royal Rumble, go to WrestleMania, and then you start over again. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, that's a perfect scenario for Daniel Bryan at this point. I don't see that happening. I think he's going to be feuding with the McMahons.
Definitely.
Indefinitely.
So that's going to lead us into kind of the second big news of the week. there will be the Money in the Bank match will be for the vacant world title. There is slated to be 7 contestants in the Money in the Bank match. Right now, we have Randy Orton, we have Sheamus, we have Alberto Del Rio, and Tuesday night SmackDown tapings. Tonight we're taping on a Wednesday, so by the time you hear this Friday, this won't be a spoiler, but Bray Wyatt defeated Dean Ambrose on SmackDown. So we have 4 contestants in there so far. What do you think? Well, actually, I think we have Cesaro is in there too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Cesaro was in there as well.
Yeah, so we have 5. We have 5. Sorry about that. So, what do you think then so far about those 5 contestants going into this match?
Great group. If you think about it, Cesaro was a guy that we were talking about last week that we thought was going to go over eventually, maybe against Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam with him winning it.
We were talking last week that he would most likely win Money in the Bank and win the briefcase for the future title shot.
So I think it'd be kind of shocking if he won, but I would like to see him win to see what he can do. Wyatt is another guy that I absolutely adore, and I think he could hold the title and he could deal with being the pressure of a champion and kind of carry promos and stuff. Odds are, is John Cena on that list? Because he's going to be on that list.
Not yet. There's speculation that he will be. When I look at the list, I would like to see Wyatt or Cesaro as world champion. I don't think the time is right now for Cesaro.
I don't think so either. I think he needs to wait a little bit. I'm really hoping that this Paul Heyman thing that he has boils over and turns him face, because that's what he needs to be. He's not that great as a heel at this point.
Right, and someone kind of made a point about that on our YouTube, and we'll get to that point a little later on in the show. But unfortunately, even without seeing the rest of the list, I've got the sense it's going to be Orton or Del Rio. I mean, it's not the right move, but I don't think Cesaro is ready, and I don't see Sheamus as a world champion. I never have. And I mean, I really don't see Del Rio as a champion either, but I don't think they're quite ready for the Wyatt push yet either.
I don't see why not. I mean, what's he doing right now?
Well, the feud. He just got over the feud with Cena.
So, if we have Cena winning, does that mean Wyatt is feuding with him again?
Well, if Cena wins the world title, could they continue that feud and then have the world title on the line?
I would think so. I think it would make some compelling matches. Honestly, that's probably some of the best work that Cena's done is with Bray Wyatt lately.
I agree.
So I don't really like John Cena. I mean, I like him as a human being. He's a great person, but he bores me to death as a wrestler at this point.
Well, I mean, when he's held the world title as many times as he has, I don't see... To me, he seems like now he's in a good position to kind of help push that next generation of talent. Granted, Cena isn't too beat up yet. No. He has had some injuries, so he still has a lot to offer, but, I mean...
Well, he's the face of the company.
Yeah, but how many more times could he hold the world title? What more does that add to his career?
It doesn't really add anything. So, at this point, though, I mean, their champion list... You're probably going to be right. It's probably going to end up being Orton in some kind of screw job tactic by Triple H.
From the storyline standpoint of what they have done since Royal Rumble, it would make sense to have Orton get the title back. With this authority storyline that's going on, it would make sense. A lot of people are going to piss on the idea of it, but from a business standpoint, I could see where it makes sense. You have Cesaro, who is going to get a world title reign. There is no question about it right now. You have Wyatt, who...
Waiting in the wings.
Waiting in the wings. He's not necessarily a star yet, but I want to say he's maybe top 3 or 4 actual faces in the company. They want him... They're kind of push it as a heel, but the way he acts, he comes off as a face.
He does, but it's so hard to tell because he's supposed to be cult-like.
Right.
You're not supposed to have a cult leader as a face. But people are following what he's doing, so he's turning into a face and his character is evolving, which is what you want to see. You don't really see that often anymore.
No.
And I mean, even just reading some of the spoilers off of SmackDown, just for the dark match stuff, it seems like they're turning him face with, him calling out Seth Rollins and then all the other people that are faces helping him out to kind of, beat the living tar out of him.
Do you see the Wyatt family have a split like the Shield?
I think it's too soon. Granted, Harper, I do think can carry the load by himself. I don't think he's ready to branch off. If he breaks off right now, what's he gonna do?
Well, I think there's some longevity there to keep them together. They haven't had, none of them held a title yet.
No, not since NXT anyway.
Really, yeah. So I mean, really, you could have a tag title reign, which I'm honestly surprised there hasn't been one yet.
Yeah, I am too. I think they wanted to keep it on the Usos for a while, and the Usos are probably going to end up. I think I heard the Ascension was coming up from NXT, so they're going to be feuding with them for a while. The Wyatts would make more sense as the tag team champs right now because they're pretty much, they lose a lot, but that's because they're heels. I mean, they're supposed to lose, and it doesn't really hurt them. But I think they're probably the more dominant force.
Well, I could see the Wyatts winning the tag titles and then feuding with the Ascension. That would actually be something I would be really interested in. Not like we're getting off topic like we usually do here, but so who do you think then? We already alluded to Cena most likely will be in the Money in the Bank. Who fills that last spot then? Because I know you and I had discussed we would have liked to have seen Ambrose, Reigns, and Rollins in it.
Yeah.
But obviously we're not going to see all three of them in there. And we know Ambrose isn't going to be in. So what do you think is going to happen?
I think Rollins is going to be dealing with Triple H, as they kind of alluded to. Or Reigns, excuse me. Reigns is going to be dealing with Triple H. Rollins is probably going to be involved. I think it's probably going to end up being a tag match of some sort with those two. I would think that Triple H would want to push Rollins to that Money in the Bank match because he took them away, and Rollins himself even said that it was best for his business to join Triple H.
Right.
And I think that would be the payoff, would eventually be him being in that Money in the Bank match. I think they're going to have kind of a weird little blow-off thing with Triple H and Rollins going against Ambrose and Reigns.
Right.
I don't know, Dolph Ziggler maybe?
Well, possibly.
It's gonna be someone that's been a champion before. I mean, we already know Cena's going to be in it.
There's no question about they're going to have Cena in it. When I look at the list, you have Orton, Wyatt, Sheamus, Del Rio, and Cesaro. You have a couple of former world champions, and then there's some uprising stars. To me, honestly, the list is weak.
It's going to be Rey Mysterio.
Well, why don't we just put El Torito in there, too?
Yeah.
No, the list to me looks weak. I mean, I've never been a fan of Sheamus. I don't get it.
I don't like Sheamus
I don't see him holding the U.S.
I don't know. I don't know why they didn't have Bad News Barrett put in there. I don't know why they did another title versus title match again, and then they made it this time for that spot. I think that was stupid. I don't understand why they did it at all.
What would have made more sense to me is Sheamus feuding with Barrett and then unifying the titles.
Yeah,
there's no sense having.
I think they're going to lead. I think they're honestly going to lead up to that. But why don't you put them both in the same match and then screw each other out of it? Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fully get the reasoning of having Sheamus in there. Like I would go with Cena with the sixth guy in there. They'll probably do something like Christian. He hasn't been around in a while. They could put him in there.
Big Show.
He seems to go into when he gets hurt. He goes into. When he comes back into big time matches.
Yeah.
Big Show, he's kind of been in and out of the picture lately. Yeah. The Miz is rumored to make a comeback. They could put him in there. Yeah, I know. I see you kind of scrunching your nose here, but
I mean, he did main event. He did main event WrestleMania. I'll give the guy that.
I like the Miz as world champion. I thought he really, I don't think he got the fair shake.
No, he's really good on the mic. Like, the dude is really good on the mic. He's an average wrestler, but
how many average wrestlers have held the title, though? I mean, you can go through the list of every single world champion. You've got a lot of average wrestlers on that list.
There's a lot of very, very mediocre wrestlers on that list.
Speaking of The Miz, another topic that come up during the week is Ric Flair was cleared. He got a full bill of health, cleared to return to full-time action.
Yes, sir.
Well into his 60s. what does Ric Flair have to offer today to World Wrestling Entertainment?
I think he's going to be like Harley Race, like when Harley Race was managing Vader.
Right.
Just that guy that's on the side doing the eye poke and the, choking out when the guy's down and the referee's distracted, which is great. I think Ric Flair would kind of flourish in that role for like someone like Rollins that's with Triple H now.
Do you see him going back to being with The Miz? Or there has been talk that he was interested in working with Dolph Ziggler? Or could he work with Seth Rollins? Who do you think that they're going to pair him with? Because obviously, he isn't going to be a full-time wrestler. There's no way.
No, I think he's going to be in that managerial type, and I would assume that he's going to be with Evolution since they're still technically around. No one's really killed them off yet, or Triple H hasn't said, hey, we're done. So
I could see him going with Evolution, but for the standpoint when he made, a couple months ago when he was on Raw, he kind of seemed to side with the Shield. Do you think maybe they'll just write it in where he sided with the Shield because he was a Seth Rollins fan?
I don't really see it.
The E doesn't care about continuity. They'll just have him come out with Evolution anyway.
They never do. I would prefer him working with someone like, Rollins, if they're going to give Rollins the push like they're doing, just for the fact that they need to get someone with him that can push him like Paul Heyman tries to do with people.
Right.
That's the only really thing I can see. I can't see The Miz. It doesn't really make sense for me unless they're going to push The Miz really hard. Dolph Ziggler, he said it on Monday. He mentioned that he was in the doghouse.
Right.
Still.
And
so.
I like The Miz. I like Dolph Ziggler. I think they should, Dolph, when he got his world title run, it was short, as was The Miz's, and I think that there's still some potential there, but I kind of wonder if that ship hasn't sailed for pushes for those two.
I think it has. Honestly, Dolph Ziggler probably should find another opportunity, maybe working for Jarrett for a while. Something along those lines. I know we've talked about that before in private,
Yeah, I think, it could be like the Christian Cage effect. Christian Cage went to TNA, held the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. I think something for Ziggler going to TNA, that's an opportunity. He can go and he can be the top star of the company.
Yeah, he could go in there right now and be the top star, him and Kurt Angle, because Kurt Angle's coming back again. So.
Right. So...
There's your TNA reference.
Yeah, there's our TNA reference. There was a couple things you had alluded to kind of in our discussions. You were impressed with the main event on Raw this week. Yeah,
I was. I really, really like Luke Harper. He's like Bruiser Brody reincarnate, essentially.
Right.
But he can do like a tope con hilo, and he can do like suicide dives. So, if you watch towards the end of that match where he super kicks Reigns right in the face, or no, he super kicked Dean Ambrose right in the face, excuse me. You don't see that out of big guys. No. You don't see a big guy doing a Yakuza kick like he does. It's just mind-boggling.
No, he also drew some praise from Mick Foley as well. I seen Foley was kind of pimping him out on Twitter as well.
So, that's why, I think he's going to be that star that's going to pop out of this group, outside of Bray Wyatt, obviously.
Right.
Rowan, I don't see him doing anything, but they're not allowing him to talk, so, how are we going to judge what he's doing?
To me, he reminds me... He's, this generation's Bam Bam Bigelow, but with the height instead of the weight.
Yeah.
Bigelow was one of the best big men in the business. He could do the headbutt off the top rope, the cartwheel. He could wrestle like a small guy.
Yeah.
And I think, he's kind of the same way.
Yeah, he's like a weird mix of Bigelow and Vader kind of together. I want to see him do a body avalanche, just grab the guy and just bam. I just love the match. I love the chemistry that the Wyatts and the Shield had. Even Cena was really good in that match too. So
I agree. I like the match as well, but for me, storyline-wise, they have to pick. Is the Wyatt family going to feud with the Usos? Are they going to feud with the Shield? Are they going to feud with Cena? I understand, if you go back to mid-90s ECW when it was Tommy Dreamer and Raven were feuding, they intertwined so many other characters.
Yeah.
But that made sense. It was a compelling storyline, and it made sense. To me, it feels like they're just trying to throw stuff at a dartboard, see what sticks. They're going to feud with this guy this week. They're going to feud with this guy next week, and it's going to interchange. To me, pick somebody, feud with somebody.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to kind of see that Cena feud go on just a little bit longer, even though they've had 2 blow-off matches, technically. I think there's some chemistry there, and I can't see it going as long as, Raven and Tommy Dreamer did.
No.
But Tommy Dreamer never wanted to give that up. So.
No. and I mean, from the standpoint of the Usos are tag champs, they're mid-card.
Yep.
And, Bray Wyatt obviously is, a main level guy, but the rest of the Wyatt family is more of as a tag team, they're more mid-card at this point.
Yeah. I mean, they're not New Age Outlaw level, but they've
No.
never won a title, so you can't bump them up into that level.
And then again, too, I guess it might have something to do where they're not really necessarily pushing the tag team division. I come from an era where you had, in WCW, you had the Road Warriors, the Steiners, Harlem Heat, the Nasty Boys.
Freebirds, man.
Well, yeah.
Freebirds were in there early.
Yeah, and then you had the Dungeon of Doom that had different combinations of tag team. You had
Horsemen.
The Horsemen.
Going at it.
You had 6 or 7 or 8 Sting and Lex Luger. You had a whole bunch of tag teams.
Rock and Roll Express.
Of star names, where now you have the Usos, the Wyatts, the Shield, every once in a while the Brotherhood, but who knows what's going on there.
Yep.
And really, and the Ascension coming in, that's really all you have. You don't have a lot of tag teams.
Rybaxel is in there.
Yeah, Rybaxel too.
They're
I forgot about
strictly
them.
tag team now. The Rhodes brothers technically are, but they're gonna. I mean, Cody is picking Goldust's partner each week now because he's not good enough.
Right.
But they're lower card. They're all lower card. They're not. They're just put together because there was nothing for them. There needs to be that tag team again that is in the main event.
Right.
Like we had with the New Age Outlaws, who were talking in Prevalent back when DX was running.
Well, I think the Usos are a hell of a tag team, talent-wise. I think mic-wise, they're one of the worst tag teams I've ever heard on the mic.
Yeah, they're not great, but they really haven't been given an opportunity to speak either.
True.
Which is a major problem. They should be having tag team promos all the time.
There's a lot of guys in the WWE that don't get the chance to speak.
No.
Which surprises me. You have your Performance Center, you have NXT, they have
Yeah.
places where they can go and cut promos, but that's a whole another topic for another podcast. The last thing that I wanted to touch on, and a topic that means a lot to you more so than it does to me, is reportedly Kevin Steen has signed a contract with the WWE. I'm not big into the independents, admittedly. So Justin, why don't you go ahead and kind of touch on that topic?
Kevin Steen, if you guys haven't watched him, go on YouTube. There's a guy by the name of Suicide Dragon who does moveset videos. I'm pretty sure he has a best 50 moves of Kevin Steen. Go watch that and you'll understand why I like the guy. Also, he's from, I believe, Montreal in Canada. And I believe he has worked with the Hearts a few times. Just to kind of give you a backstory on him, I guess. He has worked with El Generico. Had a very, very famous feud with El Generico for almost 2 years. That is now Sami Zayn in NXT. This is a guy that's going to come in and you'll see him maybe in NXT for 6 months to a year. Mic-wise, he's great.
Do you see him feuding with Sami Zayn upon his arrival of NXT?
I don't know upon his arrival. I really don't know how they're going to package him. I would hope that he would be that guy that they mentioned has worked, in the Heart Dungeon, and package him kind of as the guy that, is not, to mess with at all.
Right, and they're going to have to do some backstory, and they're going to come up with something. Obviously, the odds of him going by Kevin Steen are slim to none. Really, the only guy who's gone by his independent name is CM Punk.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll
I really hope that Kevin Steen in his contract says, I want to be Kevin Steen.
Well, I know from what little highlights that I've been able to watch here since, today, just kind of getting familiar with him, he does a lot of pile driving kind of moves, and obviously in today's day and age in the E, that's gone.
And I kind of commented on this on a few wrestling forums that I go to, that we're going to have to say goodbye to the package pile driver, which he created.
Right.
Which, at this point, depending on the size of the wrestler, he holds them up and he basically puts them on your back, like the back of the neck, not straight down on the head.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really a pile driver anymore. It's more like a Gansu bomb, which is just, the guy lays down and it's just boom on his neck, or on the back of his neck and the shoulders. Right. But yeah, I'm going to miss it. He does have some other moves where he does like a power bomb and then he like chucks them back. So that's kind of interesting. He does a F5, so
right.
He pulls that out every once in a while. But I'm going to be kind of curious what they give him for a finish.
Yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. The E always seems to be looking at the independent scene to sign wrestlers to NXT.
Yeah, finally doing that. I don't think they've really done that.
I think
until Triple H took over.
People could piss on Triple H all they want, but really, he's really injecting some youth into the business.
He is. Love it.
Before we finish up here with our top 10 greatest wrestlers of all time list, I wanted to cover 2 posts that were on our YouTube videos, and I wanted to just kind of elaborate. We had one user, ND Boy Country 1965. I think I'm butchering that. I don't know. He had posted a comment on there, but later deleted it. And I want to point out, we encourage discussion. Even if you think what you post is stupid, if you want to post something and say that this podcast sucks, be my guest, post it. We're not going to delete nothing.
We want criticism here.
We're
always looking to improve.
If you post something, leave it there. We're going to try to discuss every possible post that we can, at least address it somehow. If not here on the podcast, on our Facebook page, on our Twitter. Mm-hmm. I don't know what happened, why he deleted his post, because it was a relevant post. It was something I really wanted to spend some time on tonight.
Yeah, it was a good post, and I almost wanted just to have some discussion and the YouTube comments on that.
Right.
I mean, for now, since we're just starting out, I think what we might end up doing is just picking out, if we get enough comments, I think we should pick out, just a couple of them, and then we're going to discuss them with you guys here. And then if you guys have anything else to kind of add to that, you can shoot us an email at, thecountoutpodcast@gmail.com, Twitter @countoutpodcast, or on Facebook, just search the Count Out Podcast, and that'll bring you to our Facebook page as well. Feel free to comment there, like and subscribe. I'll do that.
Right, nice and like I said, unless it's something racial or something really racy, we're going to keep the posts up there. If you guys want to call us out on something, go ahead. If you want to praise us, go ahead. I mean, your opinions may or may not matter to us, but we want to have encouraging discussion. So that leads me, I guess, we'll talk briefly on kind of his post, which we've kind of alluded to a bit. Mm-hmm. He had made a comment about the Heyman managing Cesaro is leading up to a feud with Lesnar at SummerSlam for the world title. I think we've kind of discussed now, up to this point, that the title picture is in flux right now.
Yep.
I could see, from a standpoint of, you have Cesaro win the world title and Money in the Bank. Mm-hmm. You have him feud with Lesnar. Lesnar comes back as the Heyman guy. He beat The Undertaker. He is due for a title run. I guess I could see it, but I could see it a year from now.
I could see Lesnar coming back at SummerSlam and winning the title, holding on to it till WrestleMania and dropping it to somebody that's up and coming.
Right.
Like a Reigns.
Yeah, I don't see Lesnar and Cesaro feuding right now. I mean, it made sense from the standpoint of CM Punk and Lesnar feuding as both Heyman guys.
I think there'll be a blow-off to that where Cesaro's going to get, sick and tired of Paul Heyman always pimping out.
Yeah, and I think Cesaro will become a face, but I don't think that they will wrestle, but I don't think it'll be for the world title.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be for a title at this point either.
And then the second YouTube post that we'll just allude to here real quickly was from Mr. Twister's sister Itzful, I think it is. If I'm butchering these YouTube names, I'm sorry. I mean, it was all one word, so we're doing our best here. But he had made a comment of he's interested to see if the Shield adds an extra member. I don't think it's needed. I think you could get by fine with Ambrose and Reigns right now. I think eventually a split is what's going to happen. They're going to go to singles competition.
I don't know how long it's going to last. They have this whole, brother pact thing going on.
Right.
Because they got stabbed in the back. But that's only going to last you 3 months, I would think.
Yeah.
And then after that, you're going to see an amicable split with Reigns getting that main event push, obviously, that he's been kind of getting so far. And then Ambrose, much to my, chagrin, is going to be kind of pushed down to the mid-card, probably feuding someone like Dolph Ziggler for a while.
Yeah, and I think we alluded to last week that it is probably the best for all three to kind of now go their separate ways. They've been together, the Shield's been together for around 2 years, so it would make sense for now to start to get individual pushes. Ambrose being a former U.S. champion. I think it's time for a split. I don't see Matt in a third member.
Yeah, hopefully we can see, like we were talking about earlier, that title unification for the U.S. and Intercontinental Championship, and just make it an Intercontinental Championship so they have one title. And then you could put a little bit more prestige on it by having Ambrose go after that and eventually winning it or something or along those lines.
I agree. So, we've covered everything that has been important to us this week in professional wrestling.
Yeah, what's important to you guys? Let us know.
Yeah, let us know. I mean, if there's we've got ideas for future shows. As you can see, we were kind of doing the format of talking about what's new, what's current in wrestling, a little bit of the future, and then we kind of do like a historical topic, and we're gonna see how this format goes. So far, it seems to be, I think, flowing well for us. We'll probably stick with something like that. But if there's something that you guys want us to discuss, go ahead, post it. We'll take a look at it. We'll see what we can come up with.
Yeah, if you guys have any general topic discussions or anything that you want to know another person's opinion on, we'll be more than happy to answer any of those kind of questions. Even if it's something, strange and out there, let us know.
Definitely. Definitely. So, now to our main course this evening. We left off, went through number 10 through 6 through our top 10 greatest wrestlers in the 90s.
Yeah, let's do a recap of that quick.
Let's go ahead.
On my side, let's go down the list here. Let me grab this. I had number 10 was The Rock. Number 9, Sting. Number 8, The Undertaker. Number 7, Mitsuharu Misawa. And then at number 6, Bret Hart.
In no particular order, because I do not have my 10 through 6 in front of me.
Yeah.
You have mine in front of me?
No, I don't.
I had Foley, Taker, Bret Hart, and Shawn Michaels in not that particular order.
Yep. And then disclaimer, people, this is opinions and opinions only. If you have an opinion, like I said, you can leave it in the comments. But this is just our list, so be forewarned.
So here it is, Justin. Let's go ahead with your number 5.
My number 5, wrestler in the 90s, Ric Flair.
Oh, he should be much higher.
Super low, but Ric Flair did most of his damage in the 70s and 80s, as you know. The 90s, we saw a bunch of fluctuation between Ric Flair going from WCW to WWE and then back to WCW. A match that I watched just to kind of familiarize myself with some just early 90s Ric Flair, because I watched all the Horsemen stuff in the 80s. Ric Flair going against, was it Kerry Von Erich at Texas Stadium?
Yep.
Great
for the
match.
NWA title. Yep.
But I watched Ric Flair against Vader for the, I believe it was WCW World Heavyweight title, and Flair lost. He was out. He was done. He had to retire. It was a career match. Great match put on by both. Ric Flair kind of shined through with his just the way he was working the match. He actually told a story in that match, which is what Ric Flair does.
Well, I actually have Flair higher on my list. I won't spoil it for you, so I'll kind of get into my positives and negatives with him later. 5, though, Justin, come on.
I had a last-minute switch, and it's probably due to the fact that I didn't really watch Ric Flair too much until I started, getting older in life, and then I started really enjoying him.
I could see
character.
it because towards the end of the 90s, once Hogan jumped to WCW, Flair kind of did take a back seat. You know, he was probably second or maybe even third in command. So I could see where he would be lower on the list for you. So understandable.
Yeah.
My number 5, I have The Rock. Now, I know a lot of you are probably like, why isn't he in the top 2 or 3? The Rock only debuted at the 96 Survivor Series.
Correct.
We can go back to the argument we had the last podcast that the little bit that he has accomplished in that time is more than some of the wrestlers on the list probably have accomplished in that 10-year span. But I look at the fact that The Rock didn't really come into his own until he joined the Nation of Domination. Mm-hmm. He really got that, embraced that hate that the crowd was giving him, the die Rocky die chants, the Rocky suck chants.
Yep.
He really just embraced it and just became just this dynamic heel. He really wasn't even the leader of the Nation of Domination.
No.
It was Farouk, but it was kind of a role The Rock took on. He just kind of ran with it. And I know a lot of you will say, well, you know, the big movie star, he's the guy that keeps coming back. I get that. But when you only really have that small run, he was almost, you know, he was just a good guy babyface in that the start of the Attitude Era. Granted, he had 3 tag title reigns, 2 IC title reigns, and 3 world title reigns in that point.
Yeah.
But
he wasn't the forefront. He wasn't the focus at that point.
no, and he had Steve Austin to feed off of. It was him and Steve Austin in the E at that time.
Yeah.
But he had a good supporting cast. Where Hogan in the 80s, he had some guys around there.
Yeah.
But The Rock and Austin, you know, you had the Nation, you had DX, you had Mankind, you had the Big Show, you had, you know, Steve Blackman, you had all these other people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I went with The Rock at 5. And I mean, like I said, he does come back. He does draw now. He is probably the most financially well-off wrestler of all time.
Yeah.
Even if you don't figure in the movie money, he's still doing pretty good. If you figure in the movie money, yes, hands down, he is the number one, you know, generating wrestler of all time.
That's the exact same reason I put him at 10. Honestly, he didn't really come into his own until he came back after that first, you know, the Scorpion King movie that he did and became Hollywood Rock. That was the best The Rock has ever worked on the mic, period, in my opinion.
Right.
Sure, he was great, you know, doing the whole thing with Mick Foley. That was great, too.
The Rock and Sock connection.
Yeah, exactly. This Is Your Life Rock, you know, the infamous segment. But yeah, I think that's a good place for Rock at this point, especially since he was only there for 2 years.
Right.
2-3 years.
So let's go on to number 4. Justin, who do you have?
My number 4, and this is hard for me to put him at number 4 because he's my favorite wrestler of all time, which is going to be kind of sad considering this list, but Mick Foley. Just due to the fact that Mick Foley was an everyman. Like I kind of said last week, you know, sitting in the stands watching Snuka saying, hey, I'm going to do that one day, coming up from that. And then, you know, putting him on the spot with Taker in that Hell in the Cell match, him falling down and then getting the tooth knocked out through his nose. And
yeah, and I could see him, you know, you and I have talked at length about, you know, this list and who some of our favorite wrestlers are of all time. So I know that you have really followed the Mick Foley career. Mm-hmm. You know, and I, like I said, after reading his book and watching some of his previous matches, I've grown an appreciation for him. Do I see him at 4? No. But I think that is a good spot for him on your list. Like I said, you know, he had feuded with pretty much every major star in the 90s. I mean, Sting, Sandman, Vader, The Rock, Stone Cold, Mr. McMahon. You name it, he's pretty much feud with them.
Yeah, he's done everything that you could possibly ask of him. Even though, like Ric Flair says, he's a glorified stuntman, his matches still tell you a story, which is something that a lot of people don't and cannot produce.
Right.
Just a great thing. I just did a quick highlight. The Rock and Mick Foley, I still think that I Quit match at Royal Rumble 99 is the best match that I've seen out of him. Just for the fact, like we said last week, he took 20 chair shots. he didn't. I mean, he said I quit at the end, but he didn't realize he said I quit at the end. Just compelling story all around. It was a great match.
I agree. They had quite a feud together, I think, and Mick Foley had kind of that feud there with Shawn Michaels.
Yep.
As well. Triple H.
That Triple H feud was amazing.
I know they had a cage match at SummerSlam that was just brutal.
Yeah. If anybody has the opportunity and has the network, go watch that Triple H feud kind of unfold in 99 and 2000. There was 3 or 4 pay-per-views with them feuding. Some pretty brutal stuff. Some great matches put on by both men.
For my number 4, and this is going to get... I know I alluded to the fact that people would turn off the podcast last week after some of my list. This one will probably get everybody to turn it off. I have Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, the reason why I have him low is, yes, he had his Hollywood Blondes run in the early 90s in WCW. He was, he had the matches with Ricky Steamboat and, the TV US title thing with Jim Duggan.
Mm-hmm.
He jumps to ECW, doesn't really do a lot there other than talk. He jumps to the E, and he debuts as the Ringmaster. It isn't till King of the Ring where he fights Jake the Snake Roberts and, Stone Cold Steve Austin is born, but there's a couple years there where he's just wallowing in mediocrity. Granted, he had a couple of Intercontinental title reigns, a few tag title reigns, and 4 reigns as world champion. All basically, his title reigns were all 98, 99.
Yep.
Yes, the forerunner of the Attitude Era. Yes, he feuded with The Rock, with Mankind, with HBK, with Triple H, with whoever. But to me, that's all great, but it's really only a 3-year run at the end of the 90s.
Yeah, we'll see where he's at on my list. He's a catalyst, in my opinion.
No, and I mean, he holds a spot in the WWE as...
And I think it more or less comes down to your end where you've watched more WCW.
Yeah, and I mean, Austin holds a spot where he is one of the 2 or 3 most important people in the history of the WWE. I will get to who my most important one is later, but I would say Austin. Probably you have Hogan, you have Sammartino, maybe even switch those 2 around to some people, and then you have probably Austin underneath there. But
you forgot Ric Flair.
That's... we'll get into that one later. But, his run at the end of the 90s, it was great, but I just don't think it was as important. And honestly, when he started to get hot, WCW was still kicking WWE's ass. I mean, it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
So...
We'll get into my rebuttal.
We segue into number 3.
Number 3, I switched this around. I originally had Ric Flair at this spot. But the WWE guy in me got the better of me. Shawn Michaels is at 3. Shawn Michaels started D-Generation X. Sure, he lost his smile midway through the 90s. But
kind of like I lost mine last week.
Yeah, exactly. But the man puts on so many good matches. Every match that he goes in, mostly, when he wants to, is a good match. All those matches with Bret Hart going back and forth. My best match that I had with him was that ladder match with Razor Ramon at WrestleMania 10. The ladder match.
Yeah.
The be-all, end-all ladder match.
Yeah, I think that's the ladder match that I think everybody refers to as the marquee ladder match. The watermark, so to speak.
Exactly. Sure, the guy, is a glorified, pardon my French, an asshole, or was in the 90s. He's now found Jesus.
He's found the Jesus.
Which is good. Which is good. I'm glad he found Jesus.
I didn't know he was missing, but...
I didn't either. But yeah, Michael's great on the mic. Founded one of the premier groups in the 90s, D-Generation X, with Triple H and Ravishing Rick Rude. Rest in peace. Yeah, what else can we say that hasn't been said already about Shawn Michaels?
No, I can see. Like I said, I had him a little bit lower on my list, but like I had made the argument, as far as talent was concerned, pure talent, yes.
Oh, yeah.
One of the better, quote unquote wrestlers of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Good man on the mic. Like I said, he just didn't do it for me. I had more of a personal preference taste than anything. I didn't dig the prima donna playgirl kind of thing. I honestly thought he was, well, I don't want to be politically incorrect, but we'll just kind of leave it at that.
Yeah.
It just didn't do it for me.
Yeah, and I mean, after a while, watching him and getting into it, you see that he kind of drops that whole persona, and he just picks up that, he's the showstopper.
Right.
He's Mr. WrestleMania. He's, the main event.
I agree.
Which I'm glad he decided, hey, I need to drop this stupid, Playboy act, and I need to get on to who the heck I am, in which, that turned his career around.
Yeah, you could almost make the argument that post 90s Michaels in the 2000s was almost a better entertainer, better wrestler. Had his head screwed on straight a hell of a lot better than he did in the 90s.
I think he had better matches in the 2000s, but Mike-wise, just that, he was one of those guys. He's one of those 2-3 guys that brought in the Attitude Era. He's right there.
I agree. My number 3 is, I think, a wrestler that often gets looked over, is Sting. Now, some of you are probably like, who? Because you have your fans that have not seen Sting wrestle. You obviously have your TNA version of Sting. But I look at Sting as a guy that never stepped foot yet, as of this episode, into a WWE ring.
Cool. He's
never worked in the house that McMahon built. He's a guy that carried WCW. Like I alluded to, the last podcast episode. He was the franchise of WCW. He feuded with Flair, with Luger, with Barry Windham, with Vader, with Cactus Jack, with Jake Roberts, with Hogan, teamed with Hogan, feuded, with every name, big name, with Flair, with every name that's ever been, you could make a top 10 list of the people Sting has feuded with. Well, top 10 wrestlers of all time.
Yeah, you could. You really could.
And he goes from bleach blonde, got colorful paint, to the Crow gimmick.
I love the Crow gimmick. I don't know what it was. I just liked that melancholy Sting with the baseball bat flying down from the roof.
And you go to a guy that wrestles Hogan at Starrcade. Sting didn't wrestle for a year and a half.
No.
You have a guy who hasn't wrestled a year and a half, and he's one of the most, if not the most popular wrestler in wrestling at that time. I mean, just with the feuds that he has had, what he did for WCW, what he meant for WCW. When I think WCW, obviously, all Hogan, NWO, etc. But when you just say WCW, the first person I think of, even more so than Ric Flair, is Sting.
Yeah, it's the same way with me. That is the first person that pops into my head is Sting. Just for the fact that that's, like you said earlier, it's the only place he's ever been. Ric Flair went everywhere.
Right.
Because that's who he was. He was a territory guy. He went everywhere. Sting didn't. Sting stuck with what he knew. And I respect him for that. And last week, I had him lower on my list just for the fact that I never really watched Sting until, it was at a point where, NWO was dying and Sting really wasn't doing anything.
Right.
So I see why he's this high, and I understand why he's this high. It's just I never really watched him.
Yeah, and I think Sting's career, granted, is he going to the E? Isn't he? That topic is a whole nother. I could talk for 2 hours on that topic.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that one day. But I think his career was tarnished because he's been in TNA for so long. So he is obviously, I think, very underappreciated and very much overlooked.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with you 100%. I'll have to do a little bit more digging on that myself just to kind of see what he was doing before that. I have watched, like I said, I've watched, the War Games match with him in it, and I've watched Hogan and Sting a few times go at it in pay-per-views. But...
Yeah, and for any of you that are, newer listeners, not familiar with who Sting is, I mean, even if you don't have the network, you could pirate it, so to speak, on YouTube. Take a look at a lot of Sting's matches. He had a lot of matches with Ric Flair. around that time frame that were just marquee matches. The whole Black Scorpion thing, where Flair was, dressed under the Black Scorpion kind of gimmick.
Yep.
Sting was a part of the Horsemen for a while. His feud with Cactus Jack, his, coal miner's glove match with Jake the Snake Roberts. I mean, check some of these matches out. I think really they go underlooked.
Yes, they do.
So that brings us, we have,
number 2.
Each have 2 wrestlers left, Justin.
2 left. Who's it going to be?
Who do you have as number 2?
Hogan.
Oh.
Hulk Hogan. The reason I have him here is because the heel turn. You go from the biggest wrestler on the planet, the babyface, eat your vitamins, drink your milk, Hulk Hogan, to spitting in the fan's face, turning, and becoming the leader of the NWO. Hogan basically kept WCW afloat in the 90s through all its mismanagement. He was on, TV all the time. I mean, had great matches with Sting, like we were talking about before. Ric Flair, he had good matches with. Ultimate Warrior was an alright match. Actually, it's really terrible, but...
well, I honestly think the match with Warrior at WrestleMania 6, a lot of people complain that it was terrible, but I think, honestly, Hogan brought... That was actually one of the Warrior's best matches, and I think it was Hogan that brought it out of him.
But I was talking about the one that was later.
Oh, the Halloween Havoc.
The Halloween Havoc one, which was just a complete, mess.
Even if you listen to Hogan and Warrior, I know they produced a little documentary after Warrior passed away, exclusive kind of to the network. They both talk about how atrocious that match was.
No one was prepared for anything, and they just kind of threw it together.
And I don't like where you have Hogan, and I'm not, once again, not to spoil my list. I'll just kind of give my pros and cons when I get to Hogan in my list.
Yeah, and I like what Hogan did. Honestly, the man was a great heel. I won't give him that. It's just to me, he had that 80s moveset where the leg drop was formidable, and it's really not formidable in the 90s. It's just, you could tell from my list that I'm a more technical wrestling person. I like watching it as a sport, quote unquote.
Right.
And Hogan, I mean, he put on a great story, but to me, he didn't have that marquee match. He didn't have a marquee match for me until he faced The Rock. And that was years later.
Andre the Giant, WrestleMania 3 wasn't a marquee match.
Well, it was, but I'm saying in the 90s. That wasn't in the 90s.
Well, I'm speechless just with that statement. I mean, I'll get to it when I get to Hogan in my post, but I'm speechless at this point, Justin.
Seriously, WrestleMania 18, Hogan Rock.
Well, I agree, that was a marquee match, but there were so many other matches that he had in the 90s.
I know. I don't like his style. I've never liked his style.
You guys will learn as this podcast go along that I am a huge Hogan mark, so that probably is going to spoil with what's coming up. But my number 2, I have Ric Flair. I come from the generation in the 80s where you had wrestling magazines talking about dream matches, Hogan and Flair, who would win.
Oh, yeah.
Flair carried the NWA, the WCW, and then into the WCW era. He jumped to the WWE, wrestled, in one of the most famous Royal Rumbles of all time, the '92 Royal Rumble. Entered at number 3, lasted, and won the whole thing, won the world title. Had a feud with Savage, which he lost the world title to Savage, and jumped back to WCW, and the rest is kind of history with his WCW run. Why I have Flair number 2. He had multiple world title reigns in both the WWE and WCW. He had some great feuds with Hogan and the NWO, but like I had alluded to earlier, Flair became second banana when Hogan come to WCW. He had some, the Horsemen with Chris Benoit and Steve McMichael. Mm-hmm. That's not the Horsemen to me.
No.
Feuding with the Dungeon of Doom or teaming with the Dungeon of Doom. Fiddling with Arn Anderson. Flair's contribution to the industry is bar none. He's given his all if I were to have another list of the greatest wrestlers of all time, he would be still number 2, in my opinion, and I'll allude to why in a bit. But I think why, if we were doing 80s,
Ric Flair, bar none.
Ric Flair would be up there. I would still make my argument with who I have coming up with my number 1. But as far as the 90s, yeah, his WCW run towards the end was weak.
Yeah. To me, one other thing I kind of remember that just kind of popped into my head, Flair is probably one of the best promo men in the entire business.
Oh, I agree fully.
Ever.
I agree.
Ever. That promo that he did on, I believe it was Bischoff, where he tore off his clothes and handcuffed himself to the ring. Like, who would think of that outside of Ric Flair?
Right.
Seriously, no one would. I really do, enjoy watching Ric Flair work his match. He's one of the best storytellers of all time, and I understand why you have him at 2.
So that leaves us now
My number 1.
with each a wrestler a piece left.
Yes.
Who do you have as your number 1 greatest wrestler during the 1990s?
Kind of shows where we both were kind of watching and what we were doing in the 1990s. My number 1 wrestler, to me, in the 90s was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Stone Cold Steve Austin, I would say in the 90s was the top draw, bar none, in my opinion. He had, that crazy feud with the McMahons, him driving, monster trucks over cars and pouring, cement into McMahon's Corvette, all that kind of stuff. The beer truck, just so many memorable things that he did to screw over Vince McMahon. The matches that he put on, the match with Bret Hart that made Stone Cold at WrestleMania 13, the submission match, which Stone Cold himself was like, why the heck am I in a submission match? I don't have a submission to do.
Right.
That match was probably that image of him in the sharpshooter with the blood pouring down his face, him not giving up.
And a match that he didn't win,
No.
but basically passed out.
Yeah, he passed out. That to me was when I think of wrestling in the 90s, I see that face. So that's why I put him as number 1.
No, and like I said, like you were saying, I think it speaks volumes to you that's that era that you grew up in, that you were familiar with. Obviously, many would say the WWE, WWF has always been the number 1 promotion of all time. Mm-hmm. There was a time where, factually, it wasn't. But, I could see during that time when you have 7 million viewers watching WWF, why he would be your favorite wrestler.
What I used to do as a child is I would turn WCW on at 7 o'clock, and you'd get the opening matches, which were the cruiserweights. Mm-hmm. And that was great wrestling. But as soon as 8 o'clock turned on and it started getting into the main events, I'd be switching over to WWE because that's when my storylines were coming up and who I wanted to see.
Well, I think, too, when we talk about the advent of the Attitude Era, Stone Cold Steve Austin is obviously at the forefront of that. You had him flipping the bird, which a lot of, males age 18 to 40 could relate to.
Yeah.
A lot of people hate going to work every day. A lot of people hate their boss. A lot of people hate punching that clock. So it was kind of a guy they could relate to, a blue-collar guy, liked his beer, liked to beat people up, liked to kind of do it his own way. And I think what made him so popular was that, and then just a lot of males could relate to him.
Yeah, he was like Mick Foley. He was the everyman. Except this man, guzzled beer and, flicked off the boss and said F you to everybody. He did what we all have wanted to do, and no one can really take that away from him, and he won multiple titles for it. And he was feuding with some of the best people that were in the industry at the time.
I agree. I think, what may have derailed it just a little bit for me is the injury at SummerSlam when Owen Hart did kind of the tombstone and kind of dropped him basically on his drum, more so to speak.
Yeah.
I think that kind of derailed a bit. I think it fueled the fire for later on down the road. Yeah. But, that would be why I completely understand, and I don't really have much for argument as to why he's your number one. But I think that would be really one of the only knocks on him to me.
Yeah, and it was a prolonged period of time, but he was still kind of doing stuff with the company at that time too, even with the broken neck.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of people forget the Hollywood Blondes in WCW when he tag teamed with Brian Pillman. They really were.
That was a great tag team.
They were.
It
They
really
were.
was.
They really were one of my favorite tag teams. Of that time frame. I was surprised that they broke them up when they did. I think they had a hell of a run. I know they were kind of feuding there with Flair and Arn Anderson. I know they did a spoof. I remember on WCW Saturday Night where Flair used to have the show Flair for the Gold. When he jumped from the E back to WCW, he had that I think 90-day no compete clause.
Yeah.
And I remember them, making fun of the Horsemen, thinking that was just great TV. And like I said, yeah, they were one of my favorite tag teams at that time. Very overlooked.
Yep.
And I think that if you guys, we've said many times to check a lot of this stuff on the WWE Network, but I would definitely take a look at some of the earlier WCW pay-per-views and Clash of the Champions especially, and see the Hollywood Blondes in action. They were a combination almost, not necessarily high-flying or cruiserweight, because you had Brian Pillman
Brian Pillman was doing all the flying, Austin wasn't doing
and you had Steve Austin doing all the groundwork, but you see Steve Austin do a lot of, let alone he had a full head of hair then, but you see him do a lot of stuff that he didn't do once, he came to the E. It's a Steve Austin with a good neck, with good knees, and it's really something I think that's worth
he was
checking out.
actually really great at mat work back then, which is really good to see.
Definitely. I think his mic skills in ECW were great for the time that he was allowed to talk. I don't think he did much in ECW, but it gave him the platform to speak what was on his mind, which caught the ire of Vince McMahon.
Well, I listened to a bunch of Austin's podcasts on that ECW thing, and especially the ones with Paul Heyman, where Paul Heyman would basically teach him how to do a promo, where he would sit him there and say, "Oh wait, you're the next guy. Oh wait, you're the next guy." It'd be 4 a.m, and then he'd finally do a promo.
Right.
And that's how he kind of came up with the character, outside of the fact that WCW essentially screwed him out of anything singles competition-wise.
Right, and I think
that kind of scorned him.
Being fired from Bischoff, I think, kind of fueled the fire. I know they have talked, and I listened to Austin's podcast with Bischoff. He understands now, looking back at it, as to why he was fired. He was hurt. He was hurt a lot. He wasn't wrestling. When you got a guy that you're spending money and he's staying at home, he's seen why he got cut there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that fueled him, and I think he had a disdain for most of his career for Hogan. And I know also in Austin's podcast, he talks now how much he respects Hogan, but really kind of wouldn't show that admiration for Hogan during his run, because he knew Hogan was the top guy in the competition. Hogan was the top guy before in the WWE. They're really, from the time that Hogan left to the time Austin became the man. You can talk about Bret Hart, Diesel, all the other guys they had, that's fine, but there really wasn't the guy after Hogan left.
No, Taker is another guy that kind of filled those shoes for a while, but Taker really didn't become the guy until a little bit farther down the line. Austin was that guy that stepped in and was the main person there, kind of like John Cena is now.
Yeah, basically
really
the face of the company for the late 90s, really.
Yeah, pretty much. There really wasn't that much going on in the early 90s for...
No, not in the WWF.
Main, people that were trying to, get Hogan.
No.
Warrior was supposed to be that guy, but that didn't really work out, so...
No. So, in case you guys haven't figured it out, my number one, obviously, is going to be Hulk Hogan. This is going to be probably the longest description I've had of any wrestler in this time period. Hogan has always been my favorite wrestler. I remember kind of perusing through my baby books here recently, and apparently since like 85, I was fascinated with Hogan. I guess maybe the color, maybe the larger-than-life persona. I don't know from when I was a kid, but looking at his resume in the 90s, his match with Warrior at WrestleMania 6, his WrestleMania 7 match with Slaughter, his WrestleMania 8 match with Sid. I'll get to that in a bit. He jumps ship in 94, gives us the dream match, the match we've always, as in my generation of fans, always wanted to see, Hogan and Flair at the 94 Bash at the Beach. I don't understand why. I've read various reports. I've read both of Hogan's books. I've read Flair's book. I've heard various accounts of why they didn't wrestle in the WWF. Had they wrestled at WrestleMania 8, I think that would have been the highest grossing pay-per-view of all time.
I agree with you.
I think that Vince McMahon has dropped the ball on a couple of different things in his career. I think that was his biggest mistake of all time. Hogan, they teased it. I thought was going to happen. It would have been the greatest thing. The greatest pay-per-view of all time is WrestleMania. Granted, they got the million pay-per-view buy rate in WCW later on. I still think they dropped the ball there. Hogan also feuded with The Undertaker when Undertaker debuted. He did the job for Undertaker. Granted, he won the title back shortly after. Was the participant in the 92 Rumble, along the one that Flair won. Which everybody going into that, I remember, they thought Hogan was going to win. It was going to be, he was going to go through everybody. He was going to win the title. He'd fight Flair at WrestleMania, etc. And I think one of the other moments that stands out to me is the 1990 Royal Rumble when him and Warrior cleared the ring, and it's just them in the ring. As a kid, at that time, 5-6 years old, you see two of the biggest faces, good guys.
Yep.
You didn't see this at that time, and you didn't see it for years after. Standing face to face. The crowd didn't know what to do. I mean, when I watch that scene to this day, I still have goosebumps on my arm.
There was kind of like stunned silence, and everybody's like, what's going to happen?
And I don't probably want to admit to this because I know we have coworkers and friends that listen to this, but I remember when Hogan lost to Warrior at WrestleMania and I cried. I was devastated. But no, that moment stands out to me, and obviously he comes in, he wrestles with Flair. That's a moment, a very key moment of the 90s for Hogan, because that was the quintessential dream match of all time.
Yeah, it really was back then, and I wholeheartedly agree 110% that McMahon dropped the ball and not doing that. I would have loved to say, watch that.
Right. And
even today, I'd probably watch it a few times.
His feud with Vader, he had a feud with Vader. Granted, I didn't really think the Dungeon of Doom stuff really did anything, highlighting a pay-per-view with Brutus Beefcake. I get it, they were buds. They go way back. They kind of, broke in together. But, it's Brutus Beefcake. I don't see him headlining a pay-per-view.
No.
But we go to Bash at the Beach 96. And in my opinion, the most important moment in the history of professional wrestling. You have Hogan walking down the aisle. It's the Outsiders, or Scott Hall and Kevin Nash at the time. I don't even think they referred to him as Hall and Nash at that time. Against Luger, Sting, and Savage. You have Hogan come down the aisle. Hadn't been on WCW TV in a while. You think, okay, he's going to help WCW out. He rips that shirt off. He drops the leg into Macho Man Randy Savage. And people just, pardon my French, shit on it. They threw garbage in the ring. They did everything. They just booed him. And then he cuts a promo. He sometimes probably doesn't get the credit he deserves on the mic. He is probably not the best promo man, but he is one of the most energetic promo men of all time.
I like Hogan as a promo guy.
He cut a promo that I haven't seen anybody that can hold a candle to that promo at Bash at the Beach 96. He comes out and he talks about coming from up north in the WWE, coming out, telling the kids what to do, telling the fans to stick it. This is Hogan. This is, for the better part of my generation, we've known Hogan as a good guy.
Yep.
And he just tells everybody, F you, basically. And then, we go into the NWO run, which I think was really the catalyst of the Attitude Era. You have his feud with Sting. And, as a heel, Hogan was better as a heel than he was as a face, in my opinion. Coming out, pointing to his hand, the middle of his hand, calling himself the god of wrestling, playing his world title as an air guitar, spray painting NWO on what is the big gold belt that was held by so many important wrestlers, and he basically just pisses on the legacy of it by spray painting NWO on it.
Oh, wholeheartedly agree. He worked better as a heel. I think it gave him the freedom to not do, like I said earlier, continue to tell children to, drink your milk and take your vitamins. That can only go for so long. And the same thing's happening with John Cena, but apparently John Cena can work around that, I guess.
Right.
But Hogan could never do that. He always had to be that same character. And the heel, when he turned heel, that gave him the opportunity to actually express his creativity, which was good. Thoroughly enjoyed him as a heel character. And that's why he was two on my list.
And I think a lot of his heel promos, too, he alluded to what he really felt. He thought he was the be-all, end-all of wrestling. Going back to that 96 promo bash at the beach, he was selling, like he said, he was selling out the world while all these other wrestlers were bumming gas to put in their car to get to high school.
It's true.
I mean...
Well, everyone wanted to be on the card with Hogan. They knew they were going to get paid.
And people can argue this one if they want to. I think without Hulk Hogan, wrestling isn't what it is today.
I will agree with that to a point. Yes.
And, I mean, as far as pure wrestling ability, no, Matt T had 5 moves. But for a guy having 5 moves, making the money he did, winning the world titles he did, headlining the pay-per-views he did, do you think he's got any complaints?
No. None at all.
So, everyone, that ends our top 10 greatest wrestlers of the 90s list.
You know who we kind of forgot about?
Who?
Vince McMahon. Think about that for 1 second. The man's cutting promos every week. He's wrestling every other pay-per-view pretty much. Vince McMahon was the top heel outside of Hogan, obviously, in the 90s.
I think when you go to the Attitude Era, when the E started to eclipse WCW, yes, McMahon was probably the top heel in all of wrestling. I was just
kind of thinking about it,
Yeah, it raises a good point. Is he top 10 wrestlers of the 90s to me? No. But if you go top 10 influential people in the wrestling industry in the 90s, he's obviously got to be number 1.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you have the Montreal Screwjob, which is basically the birth of the Mr. McMahon character.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have his feud with Austin, his moments with Mankind. I remember he being laid up in the hospital, Mankind hitting him with a bedpan over the head. Or no, actually, I'm sorry. That was Steve Austin.
Yeah, Steve Austin hit him with the bedpan.
I remember Mankind having Sacco.
He'd bring in Mr. Sacco. That was the birth of Mr. Sacco.
And brought in Murple or Burple, the clown or whatever, when McMahon was in the hospital. But no, I see your point. I think as far as the influential characters, I think McMahon is, number 1 of the 90s. I mean, I would even put him as...
he was wrestling a lot back then.
Right.
Legitimately wrestling. I mean, he couldn't take a stunner worth of crap, but, he was legitimately doing it.
No, and I think a lot of people look at it like, they look at, like, today. Dixie Carter. Here's another TNA reference. Yeah. We're not talking about TNA. We're bringing
it up a lot
company
tonight.
Up quite a bit. She is more suited of a behind-the-scenes role. Yeah. And, when they brought her out as a character, and now the heel Dixie Carter, a lot of people just, go home and wash dishes where you belong type deal.
Yeah.
No, and women out there, don't take offense to that comment. But you look at McMahon, where he was born into wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
It was all he knew.
It was his blood.
I mean, his grandfather promoted wrestling and boxing cards. His dad, obviously. I never really had a problem with McMahon being a main character.
No. None at all. I just thought that, you want to talk about catalysts. McMahon screwing over, Bret Hart. That's one of those moments that it's...
Yeah, that's one of those moments, too. Like,
and that was the same year as the NWO, wasn't it? 96? Or was it 97? I think, no, it was 97.
97, because NWO was well into the...
Yeah.
Into, the year at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I think that's one of those moments. Like I said, the couple of different Hogan moments still make me have goosebumps. I think that Screwjob moment is one. That was real. That was legit. That, people talk about wrestling being quote unquote real or fake. That moment was real. A wrestler really got screwed over in the ring.
If you guys have a chance to watch Wrestling with Shadows, do so. It kind of depicts that whole incident, really. You'll see Vince McMahon come out after getting punched in the face by Bret Hart after he confronts him about it. Really real. And then interesting that the next night that McMahon had to cut a promo and say Bret screwed Bret.
Right.
With his black eye covered up with makeup. So definitely real. It's good to see that there's actually some of that in wrestling, that, something that real.
Yeah, and like you said, with the Wrestling with Shadows documentary, a lot of that really hit home. And a lot of people talk about, though, if you look at that documentary, how do you have a documentary crew following around like that at that time? Is it a work? Is it a shoot? Is it both?
Yeah.
Who's working who?
I think actually they gave him permission, and that call wasn't made. It's like the Taker call that happened at WrestleMania 30. It didn't happen until 20, 30 minutes before the match.
Right.
That call with Bret Hart, they say that it only lasted, only 3 people knew about it.
Yeah.
JR didn't even know about it, and he was
people
top 5 guy at the time.
We'll never really know the entire full story. Obviously, with wrestling, it's full of carnies and liars and marks for themselves. We'll never really know that full story of what happened or who really knew about it, but there was just a really limited amount of people that knew that what was going to happen that night.
Yeah, but I mean, that was Vince McMahon wholeheartedly, and that's why, I totally forgot about Vince McMahon being that character, that wrestling guy and screwing people over. Let's just put him in the honorable mentions, since he didn't really wrestle.
We could definitely do that. and we tend to get a bit off topic here on the Count Out podcast, and that's kind of not necessarily a bad thing. It kind of gives you guys, different things to discuss. And like I said, we really want some input here. Share the podcast with friends, even if you only want to listen to portions of it and just give us an opinion on certain segments. We're just a couple of guys trying to get this out there. We don't have any financial backing, nor will we probably ever have any financial backing. We have no sponsors.
No, we just do this out of our own time because we love talking about it. We talk about it anyway. Might as well just share it with people.
Right, and this isn't any different than what Justin and I... Well, I don't want to admit that we do this at work at all, because we'll probably get fired because, like I said, people from work listen to this. But, it's just random discussions that we talk about. So we really hope you guys have enjoyed these last 2 podcasts and really seen that we're putting in a lot of effort in it. We're really passionate about what we're doing, and we hope, we continue to churn out some good content for all of you guys, and we hope that you guys continue to tune in. The plan is that, we've been kind of setting a regimen of where we're going to tape Wednesday nights, and new episodes will debut Friday.
Correct.
That's kind of the plan. Mm-hmm. So if you guys want to kind of keep an eye out here every Friday, expect a new episode. And, we're in this for the long haul. This isn't, a pipe dream. We aren't just going to do a couple episodes that disappear like a lot of podcasts out there. We are in this for the long haul.
Exactly. And if you guys have any comments, questions, concerns, our YouTube channel is just the Count Out Podcast. Search that up. We'll show our weekly podcast going on. Also, Twitter, at Count Out Podcast. Any tweets, any questions that you guys have, anything you guys want to comment on is on there.
We are working kind of to get it up on iTunes. We are kind of running into some difficulty with that right now. So for now, expect it in YouTube. It will always be on YouTube, even if we do go to iTunes.
Correct.
So I'll always check it out here. And like I said, give us your input. So that draws us to a close for episode 2 of the Count Out Podcast.
Yes, it does.
For Justin Williams, I am Jason Shoveltowski, and thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next Friday on the Count Out Podcast.
Thank you all.